Hello and welcome to Catholic Unscripted. I'm Catherine Bennett.
And I'm Mark Lambert.
I'm your guest. I'm Father Alexander Lucie-Smith, the parish priest of St Clement's in Ewell.
Excellent. Yes, I was just about to give you a big introduction. It's a shame we don't have a drum roll. The Reverend Dr. Alexander Lucie-Smith, Catholic priest, moral theologian, writer, and get this, MAFIA expert. And we know taught at the school Mark was at, an old friend of Mark's. But I want to circle back to this MAFIA expert because I think this is brilliant. Father, you've written a number of books, I think 2 trilogies. You'll tell us about those in a moment. But how does a priest end up, a Catholic priest end up writing, as you do, about these dark crime capers involving the mafia?
Yes, it's odd, isn't it? But could I just say that there are several Catholic priests, and indeed several nuns, who have been members of the mafia. I'm observing it from the outside. I rather envy them their inside view. So mine's the outside view. And probably what I write about the mafia has no resemblance with reality. But I did give a talk on the mafia to a group of people at the Keys, they're called. They meet at Farm Street, Catholic journalists. And one of them came up to me at the end and said, "Oh, I'm from Palermo. And what you say about the mafia is absolutely true." And one of the funny things I've done recently, I have a Substack in which I talk about Sicilian things. I keep on reading in the Sicilian papers about so-and-so who was doing such and such in the mafia. And I thought, hang on, I imagined that happening, so to speak. I thought this was fiction, but the truth, the reportage you have in the Sicilian papers, confirms what I've imagined. In other words, I picture certain things happening as very strange, and then it happens in real life. So I've perhaps stumbled upon something. What happened was, many, many years ago, I wrote some serious novels, which were reasonably successful, but didn't sell. Serious novels are really out of fashion now, sadly. And so I then thought, well, it would be lovely to write a bumpy cover book. Except it's not, you know what a bumpy cover book is. Judith Krantz, that sort of thing. The stuff what is generally called airport fiction. I wanted to write airport fiction. That would be really good. And I was in Catania, and this was before COVID. I think this was January 2020. I was in Catania, and there was a man standing under a tree in a square, a very sort of cool, collected type. And he was doing something. I thought, what is that man doing? Sometimes you see somebody, don't you, and you think, I've never seen this before. What's this man doing? He was vaping. I'd never seen a vapor before. I'd never seen anybody vaping. And I just took this image away with me. And then when I got back from holiday, I sat down at my computer and I began to write about Catania and about this incredibly charismatic man who doesn't actually vape. But this man had a sort of a force field around him, I think is what you'd say. You know, you got the important impression he was a very important person. Now, this is what the mafia is. It's charismatic criminals who get a following. And the following they get, which I imagined, was amongst boys in their early teens. And as it turns out, most mafiosi are recruited into the mafia when they're 13 years old. And they're doing their jobs for the mafia at 13, 14, 15. And they're doing their first murders for the mafia age 15, 16, even earlier. So it's an extraordinary phenomenon, child criminals. And the phenomenon, of course, is large in my imagination. It's because these child criminals don't have fathers at home. The fathers are all locked up in prison or have fled or gone away or whatever. The chief character in the saga is a guy whose father was an itinerant bomb maker for the mafia and who was never at home. And the son wonders where his father is and so on. And then eventually the father is blown up by his own bomb. And then he decides to emulate his father. And the father has the nickname, the chemist of Catania, because he's a former chemistry teacher who takes up bomb making. There is, of course, a little
Breaking Bad reference there.
Yeah, there's a Breaking Bad reference there. And there are numerous references to The Godfather. And there are also a few references to Tony Soprano as well, because it's Breaking Bad and The Sopranos. Both of those were black comedies, weren't they? I've always been attracted by black comedies. Anyway, the sixth volume is here. This is a proof, hence this band across it. It's called The Good Boys of Sicily. And it's about these good boys who love their mothers, look after their mothers, and who take up crime at a very early age, and so on. And of course, needless to say, the bad sometimes end badly, but sometimes the bad get their reward even here on earth, because this is Sicily, this is the mafia, which is, of course, I quite enjoy. I quite enjoy the reversal of expectation that you can have in these books. And of course, my very dear friend Mary Kenny, the very distinguished Irish journalist, said to me, she said, writing about my book, she said, the strangely likable psychopath who is at the center of it all. Evil people, bad people can be lovable, and they can be charismatic, and they can be the sort of people who gain a following, can't they?
I think that's what I found. I always find I've been drawn to those sort of movies. I love The Sopranos. I love The Godfather. And I think it's that complexity of the characters that you cannot hate those whose behaviour you should hate, in a sense, and it confounds our ideas of I think, because we live in a world now where everything is very well, you're good or bad, and we know that as Catholics, we know that we're broken, we're sinful, we're weak, we're both good and bad, and but for God's grace, our base nature is just totally broken. But I think from that point of view, it's fascinating character study.
One of the things is, of course, we are deeply incoherent people. We are divided selves. That's, funny enough, the theme of my doctorate, which I don't think anybody's ever read, but it's a theme that's in St. Augustine. We are divided against ourselves. We're at war with ourselves. St. Paul says something similar. And if the Godfather, Mario Puzo's Godfather, which is a terrible book in some ways, and also an incredibly good book in other ways, it ends with Kay Corleone, married to Michael, going to Mass with her mother-in-law at the early morning in Long Beach or wherever it is they live, and kneeling down, hearing the bell, coming forward to receive Holy Communion. Then she went back to her place and began to pray for the soul of Michael Corleone. So, in other words, if you're a mafia wife, you know your husband is damned, is heading for hell, but you are there to try and save him from heading to hell, to get him to repent. So even the mafia family itself is deeply divided between the religious ones, the women generally, and the unreligious ones, the men. And of course, the men live with the women and have to keep the women happy. They're very good at that. And therefore, they will always give the wife all the money she needs, all the independence in the home she needs. But they will also respect the wife's religion. And so they will encourage the children to go to church, and they will go to church with the wife. But of course, they'll stand outside perhaps during the Mass or stand at the back, and they'll never go to the communion. But they support the wife in her religiosity. And in the payoff is, of course, the wife never asks questions. You never ask your husband, where are you going? Which I think is a very difficult way of living. If you're married to somebody, you're never allowed to ask them a simple question like, what are you doing today? Oh, today I'm taking a whole load of cocaine from Caltagirone down to Palermo, and etc. etc.
Yeah. And putting someone in a bath of bleach. Yeah.
Yes, I go to dissolve a 14-year-old boy in acid. He's dead, but I go to dissolve his corpse in acid. You can't say that. And of course, these are child killers, and yet they're also, above all, child lovers. They love their own children. But for my friends, everything. For my enemies, nothing, not even justice. One of the things about Sicily and the mafia is this. The mafia are our friends. It's the enemy, the real enemy of the police and the state. And we don't trust the police and the state because the police and the state and so on, they've all failed. It's only our friends who will look after us. You cannot ask the government to look after you. The government is the enemy. And the government has been the enemy for hundreds of years in Sicily. And of course, the Italian government, well, it would be cruel, it would be harsh to say Italy is a failed state, but at the same time, Italy is a state that has never really succeeded. Sadly.
Do they justify it by sort of saying that they're like soldiers? Is that an accurate
Yes,
portrayal?
that's very much the thing of Mario Puzo. We are soldiers, and so on and so forth. I think it's they justify it. How do you justify it? Well, I don't think you can justify it, can you? How do you justify it by not talking about it, by burying it? And of course, this is something we Catholics know all about. That there's certain things that are too hard to live with, and therefore we just deny them, we bury them, we don't look in that direction. Very much the Bluebeard's castle motif. You remember, Mrs. Bluebeard was told you can go in any room you like, but not that room at the bottom of the corridor. And now I'm going away, you can look after the keys. And we've all got a room, perhaps at the bottom of the corridor, which we can't go into. Because if we do go into, oh my goodness, it is the Pandora's box. You'll open a Pandora's box. Why do you keep on asking questions? A guy says to his girlfriend, you don't need to know these things. You don't want to know these things. It's better you don't know these things. So when the police come along and question you, you can say you know nothing, and they'll believe you because it'll be the truth.
Yeah, although we all know if you keep that box closed, it has some kind of power over you. It has some kind of hold over you, doesn't it? It's
yes.
I find that idea of you can't, you say you can't justify it. In a sense, you can justify it on a human level. I remember that opening scene of, is it Godfather 1? I think it's Godfather 1, or just Godfather. And the man goes in to see Marlon Brando and says his daughter has been, I think she was raped or attacked and kidnapped or beaten or something, attacked.
Yeah.
And he sought justice.
Yeah,
I believe in America, exactly. Yeah.
And then the wife tells him, for justice, we must go to Don.
Yeah.
Because justice in America has broken down for him. And even today, justice in America with lawfare and so on, politically motivated trials and accusations, seems a bit shaky. And in our own country, unfortunately, the legal system is not as impartial as it might be. You can get sent to jail for a tweet, but you won't go to jail if you've done something really, really serious, perhaps.
Yeah, and that injustice eats away at people and eats away at our society, such that you see, that I've spoken before about how Peter Kreeft talks about Colson's law. He says, as our inner lives have deteriorated and we have no conscience, and we say, do everything is permitted, do what you want, have fun, because that's unreal, because we can't live like that, the external has to get heavier, the tyranny has to oppress even more, and then we kick against it, and it's this constant balance, or this constant tipping from one to the other. But it's absolutely prescient, really, when we see our society now, our culture now. I think this is fascinating, Father, and we're going to link below so that people who are interested in reading your books can pick them up. They're fantastic. They really are fantastic. And we were speaking just before we pressed record about your preparation and your method and your observations, and it's all feeds into these fantastic stories. So thank you. And do, if you're watching, take a look. You can order the books by following the link here. Yeah, brilliant. Well, we're going to move on to, it's been a big year. 2024 has just ended. In the church, there's been a lot more ongoing with the synodal process, the synod or synodality. What should we make of this synod, Father? Is it just something we can ignore? Is it something we should be worried about? What does it mean for the church locally and internationally, do you think?
It's very hard to know what to make of the synodal process, because a lot of people have interpreted it in different ways. I would just interpret it as this way. I remember when years ago we were always talking about in the church, we must have more consultation. And we never really had consultation. Or sometimes the higher ups would say to us, oh, we've had a consultation about this. We've decided you have to do X. And you say, well, you've consulted amongst yourselves, but you haven't consulted me in doing X. So I think a genuine consultation is people who must be at the heart of the consultation, must be the people who are going to be directly affected by the decision that's going to be made. Now, it's clear from the beginning that the church is a synodal church. This adjective synodal ain't great, I have to say. It doesn't sit well in English. But if you remember, when Judas went off and did what he did, the 11 surviving apostles met after the ascension of our blessed Lord, and they said it's time for us to replace Judas with another one who's been with us since the beginning. And they had a lottery, as effectively, but presumably everybody agreed that that was the best way to do it. A bit like the way the Copts appoint the Pope; they do it by lottery. They narrowed it down to 2 people, and then one was chosen by lot, and that was Saint Matthias. And so there was, from the beginning, even before the coming of the Holy Spirit at Pentecost, the idea that the church could make decisions about its interior life and indeed its exterior life, because obviously making somebody an apostle is a rather important step. So we've always been a synodal church. If you look at the records of the Council of Trent, it starts, all the decrees of the Council of Trent start off, this Holy Synod has decided, blah, 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 blah. And the Council of Trent, we call it the Council, but it called itself this Holy Synod. And then, of course, even in the history of the Church, going way back, there were synods, the Synod of Toledo and this, that, and the other, and so, which came out with important decisions. So people went into what some people call rather sneeringly a holy huddle, and they came out with a decision. The most famous decision is, of course, the Council of Jerusalem, where it said it seemed good to the Holy Spirit and to us, where they claim that the Synod expresses the final decree of the Synod expresses the will of the Holy Spirit, and the Holy Spirit inspires it. But let's remember also the Synod of Pistoia. Now, I'm sure you know all about the Synod of Pistoia. You can look it up on Google if you're interested. What was he called? Sebastiano Ricci, I think, the Bishop of Pistoia. And he, in those days, Tuscany was in the sphere of influence of the Austrians. Joseph II, the Emperor of Austria, the brother of Marie Antoinette, this is 1790s, 1780s, decided we need to reform the church. And Sebastiano Ricci was very keen on this reforming the church, which incidentally is heretical. The church cannot be reformed. The church is already founded by Jesus Christ. You don't need to improve on Jesus Christ, but leave that aside. We need moral reformation, it's always good, but structural reformation is not really what we should be looking at. And Ricci came out with a whole load of decrees which were designed to rationalize Catholicism and Catholic practice. Well, what happened was it wasn't great, because the people of Pistoia got really cheesed off. They gathered around Sebastiano Ricci's palace with pitchforks and flaming torches. He had to jump into his carriage and order the coachman to drive like the wind to get away from these outraged people who would just happen to be ordinary Catholics. They had been particularly cheesed off by him trying to abolish devotion to the Sacred Heart and also taking statues out of churches and so on. So the Synod of Pistoia turned out to be, it was a genuine synod. I mean, it was called by a bishop and an archbishop, and had the emperor's support and so on. The Synod of Pistoia was a canary down the mine shaft, and when it got to the bottom of the mine shaft, and immediately dropped dead. And it's so people have got to understand that just because a group of people get together and say it'd be a really good idea to do this, the decision depends on reception by the people of God. When the people of God rise up and reject something, then it ain't what God wants. And this has happened several times. For example, in the time of Arianism, they used to have big riots where people would just not face the Arians. They would riot against the Arians. You've also got the wonderful example of Saint Theodosia, the iconodule, with whom I'm sure you're familiar. When the Byzantine emperor decided that icons should be abolished, there was above the palace door, there was an icon of Our Blessed Lady, I think, and Saint Theodosia saw this soldier going up and hacking off the image of our Lord, and whereupon I think she climbed up the ladder and killed the man because she was so outraged. So she was immediately acclaimed as a saint after her death anyway. She was the icon lover against the iconoclasts. The iconoclasts had the support of the emperor, many bishops and many abbots and so on and so forth, and many clergy. But the iconoclasts were eventually defeated by the people of God. Again, the Arians had the support of the emperor and lots of important people, but the grassroots eventually won through. The Council of Nicaea, I think it's going to be 1800 years this year or something. The Council of Nicaea rejected Arianism, but had very little support. But gradually, the support rose in the Catholic world, and the Arians were defeated. But sometimes it took 100 years for that.
So that's the true sensus fidelium. You're sort of you're expressing confidence that irrespective of what goes on, that Christ always has already won the victory.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's many things that have been put forward by synods have not gained traction amongst the people of God, and I think that's very important. If you look at the things of Vatican II, I think if one of the things that Vatican II very much wanted was to have a Catholic laity, as indeed Saint John Henry Newman wanted, an educated Catholic laity, which would be able to discuss the faith with confidence, and above all, who would be deeply, deeply rooted in Scripture. And that hasn't happened. It'll happen. It may take about 100 years. So I think Vatican II was 60 years ago or something. Wait another 40 years and that kick in. We are getting there. We are making huge progress. This excellent priest in America who has this Bible in a year thing, everybody says he's absolutely wonderful.
Father Mike Schmidt.
Even me, I've got something called a walking tour through the Bible on YouTube. Getting people to think about the Scriptures, getting people to talk about Scriptures, but before you do that, getting them to read the Scriptures, that's really important. I'm sure your children know the Book of Jonah as well as they knew any ladybird book. You've really got to know the Scriptures. You've really got to know, and we're still waiting for that to happen. And also, we're still waiting for people to really know the liturgy. It's happening. It's happening.
Better in America, though, isn't it, Father? Like they've got this thing stream going on at the moment, and a friend of mine was saying this morning, why can't we do things like that in the UK? That there's so much backing for it, and so many great on fire lay people, lay theologians involved in it, and they're really having a great evangelical effect, I think, aren't they, in America?
I think
we seem a lot more sleepy here.
Yes. I think, you're absolutely right. Mainly because we, instead of going out and doing it, we are waiting for somebody to come and tell us to come and do it. We're waiting for the leadership. But, sometimes you just, when the house is burning down, you don't say, oh, well, somebody will tell me to leave the house. No, you leave. It's important that certain things you just do. You don't have to wait for that. I think there are some very, very hopeful signs in the church right now, funnily enough. I think the appreciation of Scripture, the appreciation of liturgy, a lot of my parishioners follow the Mass on their phones. They've got missals. We've been selling missals like hotcakes around here, but also they've got this Magnificat thing and
Universalis.
That which is really, really good. Because before in the 1950s, everybody followed the Mass in the missal. There are lots of things that are reviving, and there are lots of people who, particularly younger people, who want to know about the faith, and they want something intellectually coherent, and therefore the clergy have got to step up and give them something intellectually coherent. Because back in the day, back in the 1970s, which I can remember, the 80s, it wasn't particularly intellectually coherent.
No, when we both grew up, right, Mark?
Oh yeah, not me.
When we both grew up. But I think you're absolutely right. I think people want intellectual coherence. What they want is they want coherence. They know that. Well, we know that the truth is coherent. So what they're really looking for is truth, because there's so much incoherence in the chaos that we see around us with transgenderism and everything else, that I think if people allow themselves the time to really reflect on that, they can see it for what it is. They can see that it's not answering their questions. They can see that utilitarianism isn't an answer to our deepest human questions. And so they're looking for that coherence. But I would say they're looking for an intellectual argument, but they're also there's an increase in attendance at the traditional Latin Mass, and I think they're looking for a liturgy that speaks to who they are as human beings, as created by God, and that does, even if it's not about intelligibility, but it's about that coherent connection with reality.
The truth is out there, which I think is a quote from some cop show or
The X-Files.
The X-Files. The truth is out there, which means that the truth exists independent of you. The truth is not in your head. Your perceptions are in your head, but truth is something that exists apart. And the other thing is this: people are looking for objective truth, which is the only truth there is. There's no such thing as my truth or your truth. There's only the truth. The other thing that people long for is a sense of the transcendent, and that is really important. And people are looking more than they were. I think this transgender debate does open people's eyes to the fact that this idea that I am what I am, or I can be whatever I want to be. If I declare myself to be something else, I automatically become something else. They're realizing this is nonsense, and reality is not infinitely malleable. And people are looking for transcendence as well. This chappie called Jordan Peterson, who I confess I've tried to read, I found him unreadable. This is also part of the search for transcendence, and it's interesting. The revival of interest in history is very interesting. A lot of historical podcasts are getting big followings, and history is objective. It isn't what you thought happened, it is what happened, although it's always interpreted fact. But there are certain things that you didn't make up which are out there, which are affecting you now. So that's good. History is on the up. English literature, sadly, which is what I studied at university, is on the down. It's on the severe down. Several universities have given up teaching English literature. The amount of people wanting to do English literature has fallen. People are not really reading it so much. I'm not sure if they're reading science fiction anymore. When I was young, that was the golden age of science fiction. I'm not sure people are so interested in that either.
I don't know if they're allowed. You're not allowed to. There's a lot of things that are curtailed and taken out of libraries, and other things replaced and controlled, and words changed, and offence warnings. And in schools now, the Labour government they've got their education department all over decolonising the curriculum and making it more diverse. So you say people are interested in history. Would that they were interested in a true, as far as possible, look at history from a true perspective. But it's now manipulated history. It's history that has to look a certain way and involve certain people.
I think the decolonisation of the curriculum, whatever that means, is not going to cut it with most young people. Because you want to go into a history class and pick up a book and read history. You don't want to be lectured by somebody who doesn't actually know very much. So I think the wokery has there is already beginning a natural reaction to the wokery. People will and don't forget, wokery didn't just start just recently. Wokery started, the key date in the birth of woke is 1968, and it's got about 60 or 70 years to run. And I'm 61, but I think by the time I'm 80, if I make it that far, the world will be very different, very, very different, because we will have gone the full arc, you see.
Yeah, that's hopeful, isn't it, Mark?
Yeah,
I think
so.
It's good to have hope, because actually it's easy to look around and say, gosh, let's despair. It's all so chaotic. But absolutely, it has to come round again.
It's a bit like food poisoning, When you eat something ghastly, you just have to go to bed and groan and moan for several hours until eventually it comes out one way or the other, and you just have to go through that, Or to use another example, which is perhaps not so flippant, if you have a terrible accident, you have to recover from that accident. It may take months. Or if you have a terrible bereavement, there are no shortcuts. You just have to go through 2 years of very difficult emotions. And similarly, with all this nonsense that's began in 1968, we have to live through it. It's got to get through the body politic. one of the things that's very interesting, the woke are all in their 70s and 80s, as far as I can see. And even people, also in their 70s and 80s have abandoned wokery. One of the things very hopeful is that people we don't really have much in common with, such as Richard Dawkins, you know who he is. He's really abandoned wokery. I mean, he's appalled by as a biologist or whatever he is. And the other person is this very sensible lady, who I probably don't agree with on much, but I do agree with on transgender issues, Julie Bindel, if you ever listen to what she says. And of course, the great Julie Burchill, who is one of the world's most fearless people and a totally terrifying person, I believe. So I've heard. I once asked a friend of mine, have you met Julie Burchill? He said, yes. What did you say to her? I said, I was too frightened to speak.
She writes brilliantly. She writes brilliantly.
She's absolutely brilliant. Yeah. And again, also people even like Diane Abbott tells us like it is. So people are beginning to say, hang on, I'm just going to say what I think rather than what people want to hear or want me to say. So we're rejecting this idea of there is a political correctness that we all have to follow. There are too many anarchists out there, which is good news.
You can see how it started, though, Father, can't you? Like this, I mean, it's kind of the vacuum of a lack of teaching that it feels to me like the church wasn't teaching the truth, and into that vacuum came this idea where it's wrong to, attack people for what they think. Because we'd stopped talking about objective truth, and so it's just about being nice to people, isn't it? And then it's become very difficult to sort of defend against it, because it's like, oh, don't be nasty. If you,
I mean, don't be nasty, as people said, no doubt, to Father Torquemada when he was putting them on fire and setting fire to it. Yeah. Don't be nasty, as they said to Queen Mary I, Bloody Mary, so called. What you've actually said is putting your finger on the actual problem. What has afflicted the church for the last few decades is the failure, not in theology, it's the failure in catechesis. We haven't taught the faith imaginatively and well so that children actually learn the basics of the faith. That's a really big problem. And we haven't taught the faith properly because our education has wobbled rather a lot. And also we haven't had the courage to teach the faith, because I think that there's been failure of courage.
And confidence. There's a lot of people don't seem to have confidence in the faith can change the world and our lives.
Well, I'm not saying go back to the penny catechism, but I am saying go back to the penny catechism and look at the clarity and try and find a similar clarity in what you're saying today. It's the failure of RE is, and the other thing, of course, has been said, is one of the reasons why catechesis has failed so significantly in the last few decades is because it used to be taught by very fierce nuns, didn't it? And now we franchised it out to a bunch of lapsed Catholics in Catholic schools, and that hasn't helped one little bit. So this is the very big problem. But I see pockets of people wanting to learn about faith, wanting to do theology at university. One of the things that's very interesting, theology at university is not dying the death in the way English literature is, which is extraordinary. So I don't know the figures, but I imagine they're quite buoyant.
Yeah, but none of them are going into teaching. Yes, but none of those graduates are going into teaching.
Probably not, but they are going into something else, learning. So that's
that is good. It is good. But as you say, we've got a real problem in Catholic schools, in all schools, but we have a real problem in Catholic schools. And until the bishops do something to try and help recruit Catholic teachers or take those who are lapsed or disinterested and form them, then I don't see how they're going to do anything but what they're doing, which is reaching for stuff in the culture and overlooking the treasure of the church.
Let's go, go back, because we're Catholics, so we go back in tradition. Just before Christmas was the feast of Peter de Hont, as he's known in Dutch, but in English and in Latin, he's called Peter Canisius. Hont meaning dog in Dutch, canis in Latin. And he wrote something called the German Catechism. This was just after the time of Luther. And he spent his entire time writing books which were accessible to people so the Catholics could know their faith. And so Luther wrote something, I can't remember what Canisius's catechism was, but it was it was a response to Luther's catechism, which might have been called the German Catechism, and also producing thousands of leaflets, which are a bit like TikTok today, leaflets. And this was Peter Canisius probably did more than anybody else to stem the tide of Protestantism in the German-speaking lands, which had become almost completely Protestant. And he also, Peter de Hont, was the guy who invented the Hail Mary, or added the second part to the Hail Mary, and got people to Marian devotion was his big thing. That was a huge intellectual. And so he went around saying to people, let's all say the rosary and things like that. So it goes hand in hand. And if you think about JP2, who was wonderful, he really was the most inspiring person. I've met very few inspiring people. One was Mother Teresa, one was JP2. It was me, JP2, and about 25,000 other people. These are deeply inspiring people, and these were people who JP2 is a great intellectual, but also a great man of prayer. So getting people to pray is really important. And you start with the low-hanging fruit. You say, let's all say the rosary. Do you remember some years ago, Mark? You must know who this person is. Was he called Father Hugh Thwaites?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he just went around getting people to say the rosary, which is just wonderful. That's what you should do. You've got to go in and get people to do things like the Stations of the Cross and so on, and Eucharistic adoration. Just basement entry.
Because you're so
entry.
right.
Yeah.
But that should be happening.
So right, what she said.
You're so right. Yes, that should be happening. I'm sure in some schools it is, but that should be happening. That should be the bread and butter, the baseline of Catholic schools. But instead, what can we do? We've got mental health problems. Let's do well-being and yoga. And you think, go and pray the rosary. Like this, it's our faith. It's so frustrating. You want to shake people. I went to a Catholic university a few weeks ago for lunch and saw posters everywhere saying, come on a well-being walk, and just think, really? We're offering well-being walks?
The model that we inherited, we've got today, is the model which was set up at the Counter-Reformation. So the Jesuits would go into some German town where everybody was a Protestant and said, we're opening a school. And it would be the best school for miles around, and all the Protestants would go to the school and become Catholics. And therefore, we better brush up our Catholicism so we get into the good school. In the good old days, 35 years ago, there were many people in Essex who were so desperate to get into the Campion school that they would drag themselves to church. They would brush up their Catholicism to get into the world's best school. And the Campion school, I think, came out the 7th best school in the country of boys' schools or something. A wonderful school, a superb school. Now,
it's my school.
Things have changed. That's your school.
Just look at the product.
Things have changed dramatically. I recently heard a story about a 2-form entry school, not so very far from me, which has only got 30 kids in the bottom year instead of 60. The birth rate is plummeting. The Catholic schools are not necessarily the best schools around. People are not going to send their children to a school just because it's Catholic. They're going to
We've lost our USP, haven't we? Our unique selling point.
Yeah,
exactly.
But our
because
USP is we are the best school around.
Yes,
and we've got to. Something's gone desperately wrong with the school system. It's no longer the case that people are fighting to get into Catholic schools. Alas, largely because there are too many schools and our population is dropping rather dramatically.
And that's because so many people for so long said, I want that brilliant Catholic school, didn't recognise what made it so brilliant. And then once they were in, said, we take offence to this, we're not happy about this. I've seen it with parents saying this, and teachers then saying, I'm not going to go along with this. And then it waters down, you compromise, and it no longer is the thing that appealed to you in the first place.
Alas, there have been several examples of Catholic schools where people, the staff, or even the governors have revolted against the Catholicism of the school. Just recently, this is in the public. Let's not mention them by name because there are probably lots of facts we don't know. But just recently, there was a report that Prior Park is no longer going to be Catholic. It's just going to be a school of Christian tradition. Probably, I don't know how many Catholics it's got in it, but Prior Park is effectively, disaffiliated from the Catholic Church. They can correct us if we've got that wrong, but I don't think we have. So it's rather sad. I think. I mean, the school I went to, Ratcliffe College, I don't know how Catholic it is nowadays, but I remember some years ago it only had about 30% Catholics in it.
Yeah.
And so, is it a Catholic school? Probably not.
Well, exactly. What does it mean anymore? Well, we're 40 minutes in, and we thought we might do some quick fire. Here's a few things from the year gone by, and give us your thoughts, Father, on these. So we've got, first of all, the new cardinals. Any names of the new cardinals that particularly stood out to you?
Yes. The one that stood out is Cardinal Rolandas Makrinkas, the Lithuanian, because I was with him in Rome, and we were reasonably good friends. I was at his doctoral defense. I think he was at my doctoral defense as well. He's so I know him. So it was a bit of a surprise, see a contemporary of mine, in fact he's slightly younger than me, considerably younger than me, becoming a cardinal. So that was interesting.
Yeah.
The list of cardinals, I think it's no secret to say, well, I don't know. The list of cardinals had a valedictory ring to it. For example, the Holy Father made his travel agent a cardinal. The Holy Father made a whole load of people to whom he has a personal debt cardinals. It was a bit like the resignation honours of a British Prime Minister. Remember, Cameron, I think, made his hairdresser an MBE and things like that. It was a bit like that. I think that when the Holy Father wrote this list or drew up this list, he might well have had in mind that this was his last list. The other thing that's interesting about
got to get the hairdresser on it. It's my last list.
I mean, well, he's been so good to me, and I look great. Oh, whatever. But the travel agent is the hairdresser. A rather cruel comment was made by somebody saying this is about so many people of whom we've never heard being made cardinals, and of whom we'll never hear again. Now, some of the people were very strange choices, such as the Archbishop of Tehran and the Archbishop, I think, of Algiers. They don't have any Catholics in their diocese. So why are they being made cardinals? And if you go back in the previous years when he's made cardinals, you've got a whole load of people who don't have the experience of running a great diocese. And that is interesting. I mean,
it's going out to the peripheries thing. Is that what it's about?
Yeah, but it's not. Yes, okay. But I just don't see how anybody has helped.
Yeah, it doesn't mean it's clever or a good idea, but that seems to be. It's like he always has to chuck in a few people from Brunei or somewhere.
Yeah, Brunei, Tonga, and Mongolia, and places where there are no Catholics. Essentially, I mean, in Tehran there are no Latin Catholics in Persia. In Algiers, there would be some expats and so on. But, there are no Catholics. The Archbishop of Malta is not a cardinal, but the Bishop of Gozo is made a cardinal. Gozo is a tiny diocese. I've met the Cardinal of Gozo, Mario Grech, who's the one in charge of the Synod. He's charming and so on and so forth.
Yeah, he's a great friend of mine.
Yeah, he's and we've got lots of mutual friends, haven't we? He's
smart.
But he has not got the experience of running a great diocese. He's not like the Archbishop of Los Angeles, or indeed the former Archbishop of Philadelphia. These are people who deal every day, morning, noon, and night, with the problems the church is facing, the challenges the church is facing. Whereas these other people come from backwards. So it's a bit strange, I would say. But quick fire, go on.
Good. Next up, we were going to ask you for your thoughts on the new bishop for the Ordinariate.
I've never met him. I know absolutely nothing about him at all.
Do you think it's good that they've got a bishop, though, Father?
Oh, yes, it's good that they've got a bishop. Yeah, that's really good. and the Ordinariate has done a lot of good work in the church, and all power to its elbow, I would say. But I know nothing about. Is he called Bishop Waller or something?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know nothing about him at all.
Okay, that's a quick one.
Yeah.
Nothing about new bishops, the Ordinariate, but good that they've got a bishop.
Yeah.
New cardinals we've discussed. Going back a little bit to education, this year Bishop McKinney put his head above the parapet very bravely in releasing the document Precious in My Sight. I think that's what it's called. I'll double check, put it below. Precious in My Sight, which was guidance for the Diocese of Nottingham on relationships and sex education and health education, all of that thing, relationships and sex. As I understood it, the Bishops' Conference had looked at this, had rejected it, and gone for something a bit weaker and watered down. But he stood by it and put it out on his own in the Diocese of Nottingham, and we commended him for that and felt that was very brave. And it just shows that it can be done. So this was a much stronger. And of course, his name was muddied across the national papers and local papers saying Bishop hates gay people and won't allow them Catholic schools to celebrate Pride. You can imagine.
Yeah.
But that was a very brave move. It must be difficult for bishops to act on principle if the Bishops' Conference are not unified.
Yes, a convoy will always go at the speed of the slowest vessel. That's just a fact. Some years ago, there was a bishop called Pod. I think he was called something O'Donnell, wasn't he? And I think he was a bishop of Lancaster. And he produced some quite strong documents on education. And everybody said this was excellent. But everybody else said, oh, this is ghastly. Because he was doing what a bishop was supposed to do, defending the Catholic faith. I think he was actually attacked by several politicians.
Exactly.
For not being inclusive or something like that. The
Fit for Mission, that was called, wasn't it?
Fit for Mission.
Yes, education fit for mission. Yeah, it was very good. More recently, about at the time of 2018, at the time of the referendum, I heard that the bishops wanted to put out a document about saying how we must all vote to stay in the EU. And but two bishops said, sorry, we're not interested in that, and wouldn't put their name to it. And so no document came out. Instead, the late Cardinal McCormick wrote an article in Spectator saying how wonderful Italy was and how much he enjoyed living there. We must all vote to stay in the EU. But the two bishops who refused to stay in the EU, or who weren't on the bandwagon, effectively blocked the whole thing. So I think in Vatican II, it's clear that the bishop is in his diocese is able to act freely. But with a bishops' conference, and I'm a little bit puzzled why we talk about bishops' conferences and not synods of bishops. I don't know. Is a bishops' conference a synod, or what is it then? If it's not a synod, what is it? The conference would hold everything back because it would be the lowest common denominator. And what did we do before we had a bishops' conference, or we always had a bishops' conference?
Yeah, come on, Mark.
I don't know. I was thought you were going to tell us.
Was the first bishops' conference? Was there a bishops' conference in the time of Cardinal Manning? I very much doubt it.
Yeah,
I think each bishop was a king of his own diocese, just as every parish priest was.
it does feel like we've lost that confidence. Our bishops have lost that confidence, and that they tend to everything seems to be repeating what the Pope said. I think
what the Pope says is, of course, let's say if you go back to Paul VI, a lot of the political pronouncements of Paul VI were very much tailored to the Italian situation. Paul VI was the son of a politician. His father had been a senator in the Italian Senate. And Paul VI, of course, was deeply involved in the rapprochement, or that's probably not the word, or how the church dealt with a vast and seemingly successful communist party in a Catholic country. How do you deal with the communists? And that was a very, very big question for the Catholic Church from 1945 onwards. And the answer the Catholics came up with is you kill them with kindness. You have a whole load of left-wing policies, Catholic social teaching. You throw money at it and so on and so forth. And it did, what killed the communists eventually was, of course, the fall of the Berlin Wall. But Paul VI's political approach would have made very little sense in England because there was never a communist party in England. So what the Pope says...
There is now.
Yeah, the Universal Father. What the Universal Father says is, it all depends, doesn't it? It all depends on the local situation. And Berlusconi, of happy memory, the deeply respected Italian statesman, said that, what was one of the things he said? The Economist, that well-known magazine, was the house journal of the English communists. Berlusconi was under the impression that England was in the grip of communism. It's rubbish, isn't it? Italians have a very poor understanding of British politics. And similarly, in Rome may not really be completely au fait with things on the ground. One of the things the Curia in Rome habitually do is they overestimate the importance of the Anglicans. The Curia think the Anglicans are terribly, terribly, terribly important, whereas in fact, as you've seen with poor Archbishop Welby, the Anglicans in England are becoming less and less relevant and less influential and powerful.
Yeah, totally.
Mm.
I was going to ask.
Fiducia supplicans. Oh, I was going to launch straight into fiducia supplicans.
On,
go, Mark.
Yeah,
no. No.
Well, I was going to say I've been speaking to Larry Chapp. The last the last video we did with Larry Chapp, we mentioned briefly Cardinal Bernardine's seamless garment, which was a sort of a social justice strategy that he launched. And I was really surprised to hear Larry say that he actually was behind the seamless garment, although he recognised the fact that it was sort of hijacked by left-wing like bishops to destroy the primacy of life and stuff like that. So as a moral theologian, I was going to ask if you could perhaps explain a little bit about the seamless garment,
well,
and whether you think it stands up or not.
I think it's a praiseworthy initiative. The seamless garment is basically saying we are comprehensively pro-life. We're pro-life in the womb. We're pro-life for old people in hospital and so on, those in the end of life, the beginning of life. We're also pro-life when people are in the middle of life. In other words, we want people to be properly fed and watered, dressed, and so on. That seems perfectly legitimate. The one thing, of course, in America, which is a big question, which here is not, is the death penalty. So if you embrace the seamless garment or put on the seamless garment, or whatever you do with it, you are pro-life, you are against the electric chair. Now, in Britain, I'm a moral theologian. I'm against the electric chair, for goodness sake. I'm against hanging. I'm haunted. I saw recently on ITVX, Rillington Place. Now, you're probably too young to remember what Rillington Place is. It was how this poor man who had learning difficulties and so on and so forth was taken off and hanged after trial on the evidence of the man who'd actually done the killing.
Yeah, I remember that.
He was called Christie. And he was called Timothy. He wasn't called Jones. He was called. Anyway, and Ruth Ellis nowadays would have got 48 hours community service. These people were hanged because they didn't have good lawyers, because they were disadvantaged people anyway. We can't go back to hanging. However, in practice, we can never go back to the death penalty. In theory, the death penalty is admissible in extreme circumstances. But those circumstances no longer exist, so we don't have that. But in America, they are very exercised about death penalty. There are lots of Catholics who are vehemently in favour of the electric chair. So because the electric chair is not a feature of our mental landscape, the seamless garment seems perfectly reasonable to us. And we've been doing quite a bit of seamless garment sort of work insofar as we've been campaigning against assisted suicide. And that is very important.
That's an interesting comparison between the two. We can't entertain the idea of the death penalty unless perhaps Esther Ranson wants to. Because to say that we should consider assisted suicide because so many people want to, we wouldn't do that with the death penalty. Because I think the last poll showed that 66% of the general population would like to see a return of the death penalty. Well, why aren't the government entertaining that?
Yeah. Well, they are entertaining death penalty, voluntary death penalty, but voluntary, in inverted commas, for people who may die within 6 months. Who's going to tell? So, I mean, the principle is there that the state, you can be killed, and the state ticks the box and says that's fine. So it is the death penalty. The principle is extremely important that we defend it. One of the things is that Keir Starmer does not, or no judge has the right to sign away my life on my behalf. And not even I can do that. Well, actually, there are many ways of ameliorating the position of somebody who is terminally ill. There are many ways which are legitimate of ameliorating their position, and people don't seem to realise that either.
And that the conversation is opened at a time when we've got huge crisis in the NHS, hospice care is there's barely any money going into this. Well, it doesn't take a genius to work out the direction of travel.
No, a genius or not genius would just simply have to look at Canada. That is the direction of travel.
Yeah,
all the
absolutely.
low countries. I mean, and what's happening in Canada is empirical evidence of where assisted suicide leads.
Yeah, and it's frightening.
Totally.
And if people watching aren't familiar, get yourselves familiarised with what's coming out of these countries. It's horrifying. It really is. If you watch this programme, you'll know.
It's horrifying that our Prime Minister seems to think this is okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm really glad to say that, Diane Abbott, Jeremy Corbyn voted against it. Maybe it has got something to do with socialism. I don't know. But, there are a lot of...
I was thinking Diane Abbott voted against it just because it was a vote against Keir Starmer.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, I don't know about the principle.
I mean, anything Keir Starmer is in favour of must be bad. Yes, I know. But, I mean, it's and she said, this whole idea of choice, nobody makes atomic choices. All choices are molecular. They are the people around you influence you, And of course, if you look in the Daily Telegraph or the Daily Mail, again and again and again, quarrels over wills. Have you noticed how many there are in this? I mean, do the math.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's frightening. Well, I'm sure we'll revisit this again as the months go on and we move to the third reading of the bill. If you'll indeed join us again, Father, I hope you do. I've got written here, Mark, Rupnik, another big name from 2024, and really shocking that Rupnik hasn't been challenged by Pope Francis. What are your thoughts on this scandal?
It was the one of the most amazing things was how a whole load of people came out and supported Rupnik. I'm not quite sure how they were doing it or what they were saying, but one of the things that you have in Italy is a very strong sense of when our man is under attack, we support our man. And we never throw our man under the bus. We never throw our man to the dogs. Now, if you think of something completely different, the Anglican Church decided, oh dear, we're going to throw Welby under the bus.
Well and truly
under the bus. Yeah, and the kamikaze bishop of not Newcastle, she was the one who sort of threw Welby under the bus. Welby was thrown under the bus. Men in grey cassocks or boots went into Welby and said, you're going. And he was very angry, apparently, and incomprehending why he should be the human sacrifice to assuage the anger of whoever. He doesn't quite understand why he's been to resign, according to that speech. Now, in Italy, it's completely different. We defend our man up to the hilt because we defend him in the same way as we expect our friends to defend us. And if we let Rupnik be thrown under the bus, well, who's going to be next thrown under the bus? Now, it's true that Rupnik is a difficult person to defend, but let's not let that stop us because, if we're defeated on this one, we'll be defeated on everything. Let's fight this trench is a rubbish trench, but we're in this trench and we're going to hold this trench against the advancing enemy. We're not going to fall back to the easier trenches behind. When you have a trench system, you'll have 5 or 6 trenches. No, we're holding the advanced trench and we're going to fight every inch of the ground. That's basically the psychology behind the Rupnik thing. And he's still got friends. This is extraordinary. He must be a very charismatic, manipulative person.
Well,
wealthy, I would imagine, and quite wealthy, judging by the proliferance
one
of
of
his
the
art.
things, money speaks. I don't know if you know about this. Money has no smell. Do you remember somebody else who was surrounded by people who defended him until it eventually was too late, and who was also very rich, and that was the ex-Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, who was loaded with cash, and therefore, he had friends. Because you're the fount of cash, you have friends. That's really important. The other thing, there was also the Bishop of, I can't remember, somewhere in Wheeler, Charleston, Wheeler or something. He was a bishop of the state of West Virginia. He also went down in flames, but it was revealed that he had tons of cash as well. And of course, another person who had tons of cash and splashed the cash with abandon was Rembrandt Weekland. Rembrandt Weekland. Do you remember the Archbishop of Milwaukee? He had lots of cash. Now, cash is clearly, if you've how to win friends and influence people. Well, cash is what you need, among other things. Has Rupnik got lots of cash? He must do, because of the
beautiful art
and the donations and the stuff.
Yeah. Well, we began with the Mafia, and we've ended with something completely different. Completely different. Where is Rupnik now?
Where is Rupnik now?
I thought he was in Rome. I thought he'd gone back to Rome.
So did I.
Yeah.
I think he's in Rome, hiding in plain view. He's in Rome.
I think so.
There are other people who've disappeared. We don't know where they are. Where is ex-Cardinal McCarrick now?
Oh, I don't know. Where is he? Because he can't stand trial because apparently he's too decrepit.
They've just there was news about it this weekend, which was that the judges ruled so that McCarrick's lawyers have asked for it to be dismissed, the charges to be dismissed, and the judges ruled that the charges won't be dismissed, but they will be suspended indefinitely pending his death. Basically,
he's about 96, isn't he? So eventually. It's really extraordinary how people evade justice for so long. And also about McCarrick, the truth has not come out completely. I would love to know, there are two things I'd love to know. One is what McCarrick looked like when he was young. I can't find any photographs of that anywhere. And secondly, what was the connection between McCarrick and Cardinal Spellman? Because Cardinal Spellman ordained him. And he was under some sort of the protection of Cardinal Spellman, I think, as a young man. It'd be very interesting to know a bit more about it.
Yeah.
I can probably find that out.
Yes, if anyone can. Mark Lambert can.
Because offence archaeology, haha. But if the others can do it, so can we. The real scandals in America go right back to Spellman. Spellman was incredibly influential, and also Spellman was loaded with cash. And you remember, I think McCarrick used to go to Bing Crosby and sort of come away with suitcases stuffed with cash and things like that, and so on. And of course, in America, they've got cash, unlike here in Europe, where nobody has any money. The Jesuits in Rome constantly, and of course the Curia in Rome is constantly soliciting cash from the Americans, because as you know, the Vatican is going bankrupt, and the Yanks have got the money, the Germans have got money.
Well, and Pope Francis has upset them, so the donations have dried up from the USA, haven't they?
Have they? Well, one of the things I also can't find out is a proper print out of, or whatever you call it, of the Peter Spence donations. There used to be a group called American Friends of the Holy Father. I don't know what's happened to them, but they used to sort of stump up huge amounts of money for things in the Vatican Museum and in the Vatican itself. It's a bit like the Sacklers and so on. They were huge donors. I don't know who they were, but are they still going?
I haven't heard of them. No, I don't.
Mark, you realise you're being set some homework here.
I do.
So you need to, we need to wrap up and say, come back, watch this space with more. So Mark needs to go and do his homework. Well, these people can't evade justice forever, even if they think it looks like they can on Earth. We know that. And we will just see what we can find out and continue to pray, hope, and don't worry, as St. Padre Pio tells us. And thank you, Father Alexander, for giving us some hope to hang on to in the middle of the despair. And while you've said that you rarely meet inspiring people, Mother Teresa and Pope John Paul II among the only two, I hope you count Mark and myself amongst I hope you count Mark and myself amongst the other.
I met lots of inspiring lay people. There was a third person I met who was totally inspiring, and you'll be surprised by this: the Reverend Nicky Gumbel.
Yeah.
Totally
No, not surprised. Yeah.
And why he was so inspiring? Because he was burningly sincere.
Yeah.
Totally sincere. No faffing around, no side to him. Just what he said is what sort of the. I think we should all take our model as our model. Good old Diane Abbott. Tell it as it is,
Yeah, stop
you're
going
big
on about
enough
Diane
Diane
Abbott.
Abbott today.
Yeah, what?
He's sincere. Oh, I really like Diana. He's sincere. Yeah.
I like Nicky Gumbel. He was a great fan of Pope Benedict XVI as well. Nicky Gumbel.
Yeah, and he was also a great fan of Cardinal. Is a great fan of Cardinal Cantalamessa. Yeah.
Good. Well, I think we'll have to leave it there for time, Father Alexander. But you'll come back and join us, I hope, for more and to find out what Mark's dug up. And what Mark's dug up that you might use in your next novel.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks,
All
Father.
the best, then.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you. Do please check out the links below, pick up Father Alexander's books, and join us again next time. But for now, thank you for watching. I'm Catherine Bennett.
I'm Mark Lambert.
And I was Alexander Lucie-Smith.
Thank you.